Hello, everyone. Today we will be talking about westward expansion and the War of 1812. And when we say expansion, we're referring to the United States as getting bigger now. We're going west to get bigger. Because you remember where we left off at the end of the Revolutionary War? We only had 13 colonies or 13 states. Today we have 50, so you have to know at some point we eventually did grow. We're going to talk about how we grew. In this period of time, it's kind of exciting, it's kind of interesting because the United States, people didn't really know what was here. We knew there was land to the west, we knew there was Indians to the west, but we didn't really know how to get there. We didn't know what rivers there were, we didn't know what mountains there were. It was a brand new world, so it was pretty exciting, it was pretty scary, it was pretty interesting to a lot of people. So, after the Revolutionary War, the United States begins to expand, which means to get bigger westward. The United States nearly doubles in size when it acquired the Louisiana Territory from France. The US wanted this land so they can trade more and improve their economy. And most settlers who went west went because they had a desire for better economic opportunities. So people who decided to move farther west, they were usually doing it because they wanted to maybe have a farm, maybe to try trading, but they wanted more money, so better economic conditions. Next, we're going to talk about the origins of the westward expansion, and it starts off with the Louisiana Purchase, and this took place in 1803, and Jefferson buys it from Napoleon's France for $15 million. Jefferson was the president of the United States at the time, and Napoleon was the leader of France. And we bought the Louisiana Territory, which is all this area right here, for $15 million. It doubles the size of the United States. This is a good map. You can see the United States in 1803 was only this big. Then after the Louisiana Territory, we doubled in size. We all of a sudden were this big. This pink area, like where Texas, California, Florida, this is still part of Spain. The green, nobody really claimed it yet. Nobody really even went there yet. And this red is England. And if you notice, France is gone now. France is no longer in North America. So the impact of the Louisiana Purchase, the United States gained control of the Mississippi River and New Orleans to facilitate Western trade. So this is New Orleans down here. And there's also the Mississippi River, which back then rivers were very important for trading. There was no there was no cars at this time. There really wasn't any railroads yet. So if you wanted to trade, you needed a river. You had to put stuff on a boat so you can trade. Another thing is they didn't know what was here. Nobody really knew what was in this Louisiana Territory. So Jefferson authorized the Lewis and Clark expedition to explore the new territories west of the Mississippi. And Lewis and Clark set out to explore the new territory that very few Europeans have ever visited. And they were actually the first people to ever cross the United States from east to west. And here's a map so you guys can see. They started off here in Pittsburgh, which is pretty close to DC where we live. And they were at Camp Wood, and this is the trail that they took. Okay, they didn't know where they were going. They were the first people to go from the Atlantic Ocean and walk and get to the Pacific Ocean. And it took them about 2.5 years to finish, from 1804 to 1806. An important person was Sacagawea. It's pretty hard to say, but Sacagawea was a Native American woman who served as a translator and guide. So this is her right here. She helped Lewis and Clark because they didn't know where they were going, but she did, so she showed them where to go. She translated with other Indians. And this is a picture of her. She's actually on a dollar coin. I don't know if you guys ever seen it. And she did all this while she had a baby. So it's pretty amazing. And Lewis and Clark, it was a scientific exploration of Western territories. So they saw new trees, they saw new plants, they saw new food, they saw new animals. So there was a lot of new things that they discovered, and this leads to greater knowledge of topography, which is like maps, American Indian tribes for future U.S. settlers. So they knew where farmers can go to farm, they knew where fur trappers can go so they can get fur. They knew where people can go to hunt. They knew where the land was open. So it was very important for future settlers. And the Americans at this time believed in this thing called manifest destiny. It's very important. It will be on the test and it will probably be on the SOL. But Americans believed it was their manifest destiny to stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So they thought they should own the whole entire North American continent. And this often provided political support for territorial expansion. So if a governor or Congress said, oh, we should get more land out west, it had support from people because they believed in manifest destiny. And manifest destiny is the belief that God had given the North American continent to Americans so they can settle west to the Pacific Ocean. So they thought God was the one saying, it's okay, go ahead, travel west, take this land. And that is manifest destiny. And this is a picture you usually see with it. These are people settling west. This is like an angel looking over them. And American settlers streamed, which means to move, westward from East Coast through the use of roads, canals, and railroads. It was mainly railroads. A canal, which you guys saw in your, hopefully you guys did the definition and found the picture. It's where boats go on it, and it helps people get from one place to another. And they also started to use railroads. You didn't always have these things, but as more and more people started moving west, they started to build more roads, canals, and railroads. And as they move west, remember, this area is new to Europeans, or new to Americans. Americans have never been here before, but there was Indians here. And as Americans spread westward, American Indians were frequently defeated in violent conflicts. Remember, Indians, they did not have guns, so the Americans had guns. It was very easy for them to just shoot at the Indians and kill them. And a lot of the Indians died. A lot of them were defeated. They couldn't fight off the Americans. And many American Indians were removed from their homelands and forced to go to new land. So if they were living where Americans wanted to live, Americans would just kick them off and they would force them to go somewhere else. And one of the important ones that we're going to learn about is the Trail of Tears. We're actually going to write like a short essay on this later on. But in the early 1800s, about 16,000 Cherokee Indians from the Atlantic coastal states were forced to leave their homes and walk on a trail to Oklahoma, where they were confined to a reservation. And a reservation is just a place only Indians can live. The government said, we want you guys to live here. You have to move there and you have to stay there. And usually the land was very bad. It was rocky. There was no good farming. So it was very difficult for Indians to go to these reservations. And the Americans were not going to give Indians good land. They gave them bad land that couldn't be used for anything. And on the Trail of Tears, over 4,000 American Indians died on the trail from starvation, cold, or disease. And this is a map that shows you right here. This is where the Cherokee are from. This is kind of North Carolina, Georgia, Alabama. This is a really hot area. It's very warm. And they had to walk all the way over here. They were given very little food. And out of the 16,000, 4,000 of them died during this trail. And they went to Oklahoma, which is very cold. And this area right here didn't have good farming, so it was very difficult for them. Next, we're going to learn about the War of 1812. And the War of 1812 was fought between America and England. James Madison of the Democratic Republican Party supported the war. Just remember, we fought the Revolutionary War against England, but we ended up fighting them again. And there's several reasons why we fought England. And the first one was British interference with American shipping, which is attacking and sinking boats, disrupted trade with Europe. So Americans were trading with Europe, maybe we were trading with Spain, trading with France, and Britain would actually attack our boats. They sank several boats, and we had a lot of supplies on these boats, so we couldn't trade. It made it very difficult. The British also had imprisonment of U.S. sellers, so they arrested the people on the boats, sent them to prison. And when the Americans went westward, it often interfered with British expansion because Britain was still in North America. They had Canada, they were looking for certain areas to move to, and they often collided with each other. And Britain also encouraged Indian tribes to attack settlers. So they would give the Indians maybe guns, they would tell them where American settlers were, and they would tell them to go attack. And America actually wins the war. It wasn't very difficult for us. We won relatively easily. But Britain did cause a lot of damage, and they even burned down the White House. So this is a picture. The British made it all the way to Washington, D.C., and they burned down the White House. Washington, D.C. back then was much different. It just had the White House, and there really wasn't much else. It wasn't a big city like it is today, but the British did burn down the original White House during the War of 1812. Something important that we're going to talk about is political parties. And the first two political parties emerged in the late 1790s at the end of George Washington's presidency. And we're talking about political parties because the War of 1812 had a big effect on political parties. As just a quick reminder, I'm not going to go through all of this. I'll have you guys do an activity with this later, but the two political parties at the time were Federalists, which had John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. There's also another political party named the Democratic Republicans, which had Thomas Jefferson and James Madison. George Washington was a Federalist, and who was our first president. John Adams, who was our second president, was a Federalist. And Jefferson, who was our third president, was a Democratic Republican. He was the first president of a different political party. So the election of 1800 is important because John Adams lost to Thomas Jefferson, and this was the first president not to be a Federalist. So, as I said earlier, Adams was a Federalist. He was our second president, and George Washington was our first president. They were Federalists. And Thomas Jefferson, our third president, was not a Federalist. And Federalists, they were opposed to James Madison and his resolution and to the War of 1812. So they did not agree with the War of 1812. They did not want to fight in it. And Federalists met at the Hartford Convention and discussed succession. And that's where you leave the United States. So Federalists were talking about, we don't want to be American anymore, we should leave the United States. But following the war, which America won, Federalists were viewed as unpatriotic and treasonous. So unpatriotic is where people think you don't like America, and treasonous is where you're against America. So after the war, people did not like Federalists, and they came to an end. So today there's no Federalist Party because people thought they didn't like America, which is unpatriotic, means you don't like America. And another big impact was thousands of enslaved African Americans departed to join British forces, which enhanced American efforts to prevent future invasions, such as Fort Monroe. But remember, enslaved African Americans, they do not want to be here. They were forced to come here. They have horrible lives. They get treated very bad. So during the War of 1812, England said, you know what? You can be free. Come with us. You just have to help us fight the war. So lots of them left. Thousands left and joined the British forces. And a market revolution emerged, transforming the American economy. So the American economy really improved. We started trading a lot. We had lots of money. And many public works, which is things like roads, canals, railroads, ports, were funded by tariffs, which are taxes through the American system. All right, the last slide, the War of 1812 impact. So there was lots of improvements following the War of 1812. One big improvement was transportation improvements with canals and railroads. So canals is where there's no water, but you dig a bunch of holes, so then there is water. Then you can take boats on it. They built a lot of railroads, which is good when you're trying to move, when you're trying to ship stuff. And there was agricultural improvements with the cotton gin and the mechanical reaper. So if you guys saw in your definitions. And there was industrial innovations like the textile mills. And another important one is communication, such as the telegraph. So if you were in Alabama and you wanted to talk to somebody from New York, instead of it taking weeks to send a letter, you just use a telegraph. You push some buttons and you can send a message. So there's more implications as we continue to try to expand westward and we acquire new territory and new states. So if you have any questions, let me know.